Welcome to a Leader's Journey podcast. I'm your host, Joel Gunn. Today I have with me a friend of several years, Mr. Bo Carrington. Bo, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here. Look forward to this.
Yeah, me too. It's taken us a little while to get on each other's calendars, so
I guess that's a good thing. That means we're busy with other things.
well, so long as they're productive.
Yes, indeed.
That's right. Just before the show, we were talking about, and we'll dive right into business, faith, and other things that matter to both of us. And you made the comment about business is simple, but it's not easy. Unpack that for me.
Well, it's really more about leadership is simple, just not easy, in the sense that we, whether it's in a faith walk in a business or whether it's leading a secular business, we all know what the right things are to do, but we also know sometimes the right things are the hard things to do. And when that happens, I think our mind plays games with us because we're afraid to fail. So if we make things complex, if we overthink them and think about them from all different kinds of angles, if we fail, it's okay then because it was hard, it was complex. It's not simple. But I also believe too that failing at something simple is not something that our egos stand for. So that's kind of what I meant by that. It really does break down that we all know the right things. They're just not always easy to do.
Let's dive a little deeper. Ego. Leaders and ego.
Ego is, prior to C12, I spent probably almost 18 years as an executive coach, working with a lot of senior leaders, big companies and small companies. And the one consistent theme that I worked up against was ego. And whether it was somebody that had too much ego or not enough ego, because the not enough comes out oftentimes as too much. And it's the thing that I've learned over the years is that our brains are very adept at taking care of us. and if our self-concept is challenged, for whatever reason, our brain has a way to adapt to allow us to be able to overcome the challenge. And so if you deal with somebody, if I'm working with somebody that has, let's just say, a lack of true self-confidence or self-esteem, but they're in a leadership role, oftentimes what I've seen and what you typically see is somebody that's overcompensating with ego to try and make the rest of the world believe that they are confident, that they are strong, but the whole time they know they're not. And in that process, our brains have a way of convincing us that what we want to be true is true. And in doing that, we end up taking on a set of behaviors that are typically not very productive and not very leadership-like. And so I take that back to the statement about simplicity and understanding that I don't have to be confident to be successful. I have to be willing to admit that I'm not confident before I can be successful. It's the element of humility that I think is probably even more important than confidence. Because if I'm humble, if I really take a lot of stock in who I am and how I am and whose I am, and I step out, whether I step into something that I'm not confident in doing, I'm doing it fully informed. But by doing that, I'm not going out on a false pretense. I'm admitting that I'm not confident taking the step, but I'm taking the step out of faith that it's the right thing to do. And I'll be prepared to do whatever it is that I need to do if it doesn't work the way that I want it to or the way that it should work.
You wouldn't be a very good Hollywood scriptwriter.
No, I wouldn't.
Because the guy's got to be confident. it's got to lack humility if you're going to lead well.
You know, it's funny you say that because that's something that I had my mentor as I was coming up in coaching wrote a book, did a bunch of research around humility, and wrote a book about it. And it's basically it's the central element of servant leadership is humility, and that your most successful leaders over time. And when I say successful, they're not flash in the pans. These are people that have done amazing things through the people that they led, did it with humility. And it was sustained. And the research that they did showed that. And these are some of these people that they researched were people that neither one of us had ever heard of. But when you look at the things that they were able to accomplish and the impact that they made and the legacy they left behind, you have to wonder, okay, maybe there is something to this humility stuff. And I still believe that it takes a stronger person to be humble than it does one to be confident.
There was a book a friend of mine shared with me probably 25 years ago called The Millionaire Next Door. And it was these researchers went off with this assumption of, let's go look at, are there any common threads among American millionaires? And I'm a data kind of guy, so I enjoy the research.
I'll let you tell me what the data says.
But it was shocking, quite honestly, that the data painted the picture that the typical American millionaire was generally liked. In the case of a business owner, his employees felt like he cared for them. They on average drove a Toyota Camry or a Ford F-150. They generally spent less than they brought in. They were generally seen as caring people. And so that actually shocked me, which then surprised me because I consider myself fairly aware of, paradigms that Hollywood thrust upon us. And I realized one had snuck through, that I had actually believed that you had to be the cutthroat jerk, to be at the top of the food chain. And that's not actually what the research indicated, and which was one of the reasons it was easier for me to digest, because I had had an opportunity to have a consulting practice at the time. I was only in it a few years, but my experience thus far back then had been that business owners, at least here in Texas, my little part of the world, generally seem to follow the research. If you talk to their employees, in fact, there was one guy that I worked for on project basis, helped him with some stuff and a lot of fun stuff. But he cussed more. Now I grew up in a Fortune 500 company, primarily run by former military.
So
Okay.
you know what cussing is.
So I knew what cussing was, and occasionally there was cussing at high volume in the conference rooms, But he used words I'd never even heard, and more in an hour with him than I'd heard in a year, hanging out with these military guys. But then we get to his conference room, and his team's debriefing him on some stuff we'd done. He literally teared up in pride and complimented his team. And, so what I was seeing out in the field was very much matching what the research was showing. He genuinely cared for his people, and they felt it. They knew it. Now, he, on the exterior, a harsh person. Like if you just were to meet him in a party or something, you'd say, man, I'd hate to work for that jerk. But that's not what his people felt.
No, and I think that's one of the misnomers too that we run into is, you're right. Hollywood paints a certain picture for us, but I've said from the get-go, when I first, let's say I'm former military as well, so I can tell you that I've probably got more examples of bad leaders than I do good. They've all informed me and how I practice leadership and how I also help develop it along the way. But when I go back and I look at those, the big difference between the good and the bad had nothing to do with language. It had nothing to do with outward behaviors, because I know a lot of leaders that would consider themselves good because they checked all the boxes, but they were horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's again, this kind of goes back to the simple, just not easy thing, is leadership is not about a set of actions. It's about a heart, because leadership comes from within and it has to come out. So the gentleman that you were describing, the cussing and, how he acted outwardly was not a reflection of his heart. That was just a reflection of his environment. But the heart was what connected with his employees. He was authentic. He didn't pretend to be something that he wasn't, but he made sure that his people understood that he cared. And that's it's almost paradoxical at times. But when I talk about things being simple, not easy, it is simple. It breaks down to, I've just got to be me. I've got to be okay with who I am and how I am. And I've got to be willing to put your needs ahead of mine if I want you to follow me. And by me being authentic, it allows you to trust that I'm doing that for the right reason. World's full of cult leaders out there that use that psychology. The difference was they were really good about hiding their true motive because they were feeding their own egos. And there's a lot of pastors that do the same thing still. I wouldn't call them cult leaders, but I think it's a psychological challenge that we have in society today, is that people never really stop to examine their own hearts. And at the end of the day, when God looks at us, he knows our hearts. He can see it clear as day. And again, it's very simple. You either love him, and if you love him, you're going to love others, or you don't. You love yourself. Simple. It's not always easy to love God, because it means we have to trust him. It means we have to put faith out there. We have to take steps that we're not sure where it's going to lead us. But it's simple. I just need to take a step. No, let me think about this more. Let me make it complex so I don't have to take the step. And so that's why I keep coming back to, and I love having those conversations with people when they talk about how complex a situation is. And I love taking it down to its base roots and going, now tell me about the complexity again. It's either this or that, right? And they're like, okay, yeah. Okay, well, which one is it?
What do you, as your coach and CEOs, what do you see their biggest wrestle is besides ego? What's their next biggest thing that they
Success. How they define it.
Okay.
And I think a lot of CEOs, well, especially Christian CEOs, they, and I can put we in that because I fall into that at times as well. We allow the non-faith version of success to creep in, and we allow society to influence how we view success, money, status, all those other things. As a chair, it's to say, hey, look at my tables. Look how many CEOs that I'm stewarding. Or look at the house I live in. Look at how much money I make. It's easy to fall into that. The reality is, though, that success for us, for a Christian, is defined in the Bible. Ours, we can, as a business CEO, as a Christian CEO in business, we just add a few other elements to it. And that's okay. It's okay to make a profit. It's just not okay to be driven by profit. It's okay if you want to promote from within, or if you want to hire from outside. Those things are all okay, but you got to sit back and really examine the motive behind it. Are you promoting from within because you don't want outsider input? Or are you hiring from outside because you don't want people here for the long term.
Just so the viewers are on the same page, when you say biblical definition of success, share that.
We are called to do one thing and one thing only, and it's to spread the gospel, to share the love of Jesus with all of our neighbors, all of our friends in all the nations. We're called to be disciples. How we do that depends on how we live. As a Christian CEO, we're called to be disciples. Well, who's in our flock? Well, it's our employees. It's our vendors. It's our customers. It's anybody that our business touches. That's who could be a disciple for me as a Christian CEO. And we talk a lot about business as ministry in C12 because we do. We view business as our ministry. But I think this also goes to one of those definitional things, like I talked about success earlier. Ministry, oftentimes when we talk ministry, we think one of two things. We think an organized function inside a church that's doing something to spread the gospel, whether it's through youth or whatever. Or we think about a ministry that's all about serving, going out and building houses or, going on, it could be any number of things, going on mission trips, things like that. Hey, well, you put that into the business context, the business world, it doesn't fit the same way. So with businesses, we tend to see people that look at their business as a ministry, but it's really more about their business funds a ministry. Or their business allows them to take employees to say, hey, it's important that we serve our community, so we're going to go build a house for Habitat together. That's our ministry. There's nothing wrong with any of those. There's nothing wrong with giving away 40% of your profit and saying, that's my ministry. That's really not ministry, though. Because ministry starts, this is the simple part, it starts with who are you touching first? Your employees. Would your employees feel like they're living in a ministry, that they're being loved on by Jesus every day that they show up at work? Because if they're not feeling it, your employees, your customers aren't feeling it, your vendors aren't feeling it, the community's not feeling it. So to me, business ministry starts with our employees, how we treat them, the processes that we build that touch vendors, that touch clients or customers, and that eventually roll out into the community. Simple things, how we manage payroll, how we manage collectibles, how we manage payables, all the things, the machinations that go on in a business. There's a way to do it that's a good way, a right way. Don't always think about it that way.
I've never gone here on a podcast thus far, and I probably will again in the future, but have you run into CEOs that are getting the ministry part right at work, but not at home? Are those two tied together?
I have not run into that yet. It would not shock me because I could see very easily how somebody could get so tied up into their business as a ministry that becomes an idol. And anytime something becomes an idol, it takes away from other areas, God and family. So if the business becomes an idol, you could very easily see how it could
Even
take
if it's
away
for a good cause.
it's for a great cause, but it's still taking away from the family. And honestly, it's probably out there now, and I just don't know it yet. I know most of my clients, my members. I know their marriages. I know if their struggles. I know what they're about. At least I think I do. But I haven't seen that there. But I could see where it could very easily.
Where my mind went was, or you said something a moment ago that triggered it. Those are usually the ministries that end up on TV, right, on the news, where
Preachers.
The preacher was so into the ministry that he forgot about the family. And so he starts looking at other opportunities outside the marriage.
Yep.
And that's what goes public, right? And those statistically very rare failures compared to, the 100,000 churches in America or more. So I just have to imagine as this business as a ministry movement evolves and grows, that there's going to be more and more of those opportunities, at least. And again, a statistical anomaly, I would hope.
But I think it comes back to idolatry, and in the sense that we're keeping the right things in perspective, because it's all about God. It's not about us. It's not about the ministry. It's about Him. And as long as we truly keep it up here about God, and recognize that I can't have a good ministry if I don't have a good family, because my first ministry is in my family. And I think that's where we have to come back to. The Bible teaches us clearly. It's very simple. That it starts in the home. It starts with my wife, then with my kids, and then it rolls out. I can't be successful on the outside, business as a ministry, if I'm not successful on the inside as family, as a ministry first. So it's really keeping things in perspective. And, we talk about church leaders, or it could be a CEO, business CEO, that they get so wrapped up into their job as a CEO, that becomes their identity. And anytime that separates us from family, from God, from other things, there's things, Satan's going to allow things to creep in. He's going to create that perfect opportunity for somebody to meet a need that we're feeling in the moment for whatever reason. And, we're weak, we're broken. Some of us are going to fall. And it's because we've detached ourselves. So that comes back to what I said earlier about, checking the boxes. We can get really good at convincing ourselves that we're doing all the right things for the right reasons.
Imagine our viewers are listening in on this podcast, and one of them, we're striking a chord. They're wrestling right now with, but I'm successful and I'm this, but they know there's an idol. They know there's a door. They're justifying it right now, even as they're listening. What questions do they need to start asking themselves, or asking God, or what do they need to pray? What do they need to wrestle with?
I think it starts there. I think it starts with prayer. And it's us honestly going to the feet of God and asking Him to open us up and to help us see what He sees. Because I think when that happens, what we'll find is that while, I may be successful the way that society deems I'm being successful, my kids may be floundering, my wife may be philandering. I could have all these other things going on over here that I don't know my business is causing. I'm putting people on the street because I'm not aware of how things are being executed inside the business. So I think it comes back to the definition of success, and it's not one dimensional. I think we try and make it one dimensional.
How much does the CEO or business owner, leader, how much do they have to own it? Whatever it is, they're responsible for a team or a business, or we talk about there's got to be that level of ownership. How do they walk that tightrope with owning it but not being responsible for the numbers, but not responsible for the outcome? Maybe
That's a great question.
Kind of from an eternal perspective, maybe.
Well, at the end of the day, eternal results we have no control over. Sometimes we're called to plant seeds, sometimes we're called to water, sometimes we're called to harvest. But at the end of the day, we're not the ones saving anybody. We're not giving anybody eternal life. All we're doing is pointing them and allowing God to work. And typically when we're pointing, it's God working through us if we're truly doing it the right way. But I think coming back to that question, I mean, and it's never thought about it in that context. Feed it to me in a different way.
As CEOs, as business owners, you and I both have clients. They literally started the business in their garage 20, 30, 40 years ago. They own it.
Yeah.
Right? They're responsible for dozens, if not hundreds of families being fed this week because of the business that they started.
Mm-hmm.
So there has to be this high level of ownership because they are responsible for hitting the numbers, for running the business, keeping it healthy. They're stewarding something significant, but they don't own it. You know, so they do own it from they're responsible for the business, but God says you don't really own anything. Once you pass through the grave, it all stays behind.
And in that case, I come back to a model that I used to use with my coachees all the time. I would draw two circles, and one overlapped the other. And I'd write in the left one, this is everything in your life that you have control over. In the right one, I'd put, this is everything in your life that you have no control over. And I said, that area where there's overlap, that's where we have influence over what we can't control. The first thing that I as a person have to do before I can lead anything is understand, what am I working with? Which circle am I in? Because I can't control the outcomes. All I can control is what I do to generate the outcomes. I own my behavior, my actions, my decisions. I have to trust that they're the right things that will lead to the outcomes. Now, at the end of the day, I'm responsible for those outcomes based off my decisions. So to me, that's where ownership really comes in, because I can't say, well, it's not my fault. I did everything right. Well, no, obviously you didn't. If I'm the one that made the decision to go to the right, and to the right took me off the ledge, I may have had bad data that led me there. Well, then I have to come back and say, okay, well, what could I have done to have prevented it? Maybe check my data. Maybe looked at another set of data to see if it was in alignment. So to me, it always comes back to, what do I have control over? What did I have control over? And as a business owner, they can't control what their employees do. All they can do is influence it. And that comes down to the relationships. So in that overlap, if I can't control what the employee's doing, and I step back up here out of the circle, and I'm focused on what I can't control, meaning, well, I'm going to build a system that's going to manage that employee and make them do what I need them to do. No, you're not. They're not robots. That doesn't work that way. But I'm going to step up here. I'm going to worry. I'm going to do all these other things over here. I'm wasting time and energy because I can't control what I can't control. But if I take all that time and energy and come back over here and say, what can I do as the leader, as the owner, to best help my employees do what they need to do and what I need them to do to get the outcome that I want, I'm taking ownership. So to me, ownership is not about outcomes. It's about activities. It's about behaviors. It's about my heart. It's all the stuff that I have control over. Because I'm going to be accountable for the outcomes, but it's going to probably tie back to something I did or didn't do.
Have you met leaders that try to control too much?
Most that I work with do. And I mean, we all have that in us.
Sure.
We want to control our outcomes. We want to control things that we fear. And that's one of those, I love the simplicity of those circles because I can apply that to myself at any given time. Anytime I start to worry about something, I can raise my own hand and say, okay, Bo, what circle are you in? Because that's what I would do with a coachee. If they're expressing concerns or fears to me that I thought are probably unfounded, I'd ask them, I say, well, what circle are you in? And they either grew to love that or they grew to hate it because nobody likes being reminded, dude, you're whining, because that's what happens when we sit in this no control zone over here and we worry and we complain and point fingers. It means that we're not taking responsibility. We're not owning what we should own. We're whining.
Let's say a business leader is making a tough decision. He's concerned how it's going to impact the families of the employees. How much of that does he have to own?
I think I'm going to give you a consultant's answer.
Okay.
It depends.
Sure.
No, and I do think it depends, because I think every situation is probably going to be a little bit different. But if we start in the right place, which is prayer, when it comes to those tough decisions, and we do all of the right things, we seek out the wise counsel, we go to the Bible, we do those things that we as chairs talk about doing all the time. If we do all those things, and it has a negative impact, then it's one of those that we're responsible. But as far as owning it, it's one of those, I have to be prepared for whatever outcomes happen as a result, which means that if I'm prepared, I'm going to probably have a mitigation plan in place that's going to say, well, I didn't expect this to happen, but I thought it could. Therefore, I planned. And it's just basic scenario planning, which any good leader should be doing when making tough decisions. Because if we want it to go to the left, that's great. We know what happens if it goes to the left, but we have to be prepared for it to go to the right. And we have to be prepared for what to do to mitigate in that. So if I don't have this plan, I truly am not owning my decision or its outcomes. So, but if I plan and I'm prepared, it's one of those that I'm going to do my very best to minimize the impact on employees and family. And if I'm communicating with employees throughout that process and I'm owning my decision and saying, this is the plan, however, how we're going to come back from this, I think I'm going to build even more trust and even more appreciation, because my employees see that I truly do care. I love them. I'm concerned for them, and I'm doing everything in my power to help them.
Leaders, do they plan too much or too little? Generally speaking.
Just depends.
Okay.
I've got two different groups. I've got some that plan, and never execute, because they're looking for the perfect plan that can't fail. There's no such thing.
Right.
And then you've got those that don't plan whatsoever, and they're thinking, well, my gut tells me, oh, this is the right thing. It's never failed me now. Yeah, okay, until now. So I think we've got both out there. And there is no definition of how much planning is the right planning. It's the right planning is the right planning. The right plan is the right plan. So this is one of those that I think the best planner, the best leader that plans is the one that's able to step back away from whatever the decision is and to look at their business as a whole and understand that if I do this, what are the ripple effects that are likely to happen, positive or negative? We typically know the positive. That's why we're trying to make the decision. You know, if we up the spend on content management for our marketing, we know the potential impact for that, positive. But what we may not consider is the amount of cash that it's going to take to do that is going to deplete our reserves, which means that we're now in a dangerous position if something were to go wrong. Don't always think about those things. We think about the other things, what we want to happen.
Upside.
We don't think about the ancillary impacts of the decision. And so to me, a good leader is one that's going to understand that decision and from every direction inside the business and understand strategically what kind of impacts they're looking at potentially.
Of the leaders you've met so far on your journey, what percent would you say have considered at least one negative impact in their plans?
Oh, I think most do.
Okay.
I think, but the one negative is typically, well, what if it fails?
Mm-hmm.
It's not what if it succeeds.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes the success, and look at our politicians. Government is a perfect example. They make great decisions for a minuscule problem, and I'm making light of it, minuscule problem. The problem is they create 5 other problems trying to solve the minuscule problem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they're short-sighted thinking. Nonprofit world that lives and breathes. You know, we spend billions of dollars on downstream impacts where we're treating with Band-Aids and tourniquets. We've got to stop the bleeding before it starts, which means that we've got to go upstream. We're not thinking that direction. Same thing happens with businesses. We tend to be very much in reaction mode. We're not stepping back and looking at our business holistically, strategically, and really understanding how things flow and what happens if we disrupt that flow as things come off.
In 40X, they call that daily disruption the whirlwind. We called it firefighting in corporate life. How, somebody realizes they're caught up in but Bo, you don't understand. I got so much going on. I got so many fires to put out right now. This is a do or die. This is make or break. I'm just too busy.
Mm-hmm.
How do they break that cycle?
Depends. Don't you love that when you talk to a consultant coach? It really does, in the sense that I think the approach is different with each person because of where they are. For me, typically, it starts with a question. Well, let's unpack what it is that's going on. And then that leads to another question, which leads to another question.
It's a type of root cause analysis.
It is. It is. It's really working to understand, but it's not as much about me understanding as much as it is about me helping them understand. Because when you get caught in the whirlwind, you're not thinking, you're feeling. And it's a matter of re-engaging that thinking part of the brain that allows us to grow and succeed. That reptilian survival piece of our brain does a great job if we were still in caveman days, but it doesn't do real well in today's active society. It'll keep us from getting run over, but it won't keep us from running a business into the ground because we lose sight of something important because we're focused on something that's not important but hurting.
Viewers tuned into the podcast, they're like, well, but reality is I'm caught in the whirlwind. But what advice, if they were sitting across from the table, how would you help them break that down?
Go back to my circles.
Okay.
Let's look at everything that's in your whirlwind right now. What can't you control? Let's start breaking it out. And again, it's more of the process of re-engaging this. I use an analogy used to when I was talking about emotional intelligence, talking about how the brain works, is that, we've managed to survive all the time that we have primarily because of that part of our brain that is not thinking but doing. It's very reactive. It's not a processor. It's just fight, flight, freeze. Now, some variation to that, but how we've managed to grow individually and as a society is through the higher level thinking. Well, and that's the difference between adding numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 to come up with whatever that is, which I could tell you in just a minute if I wasn't talking. But it's more about how do I multiply 5 times 12 times 50 times 75? That's our higher level thinking. It requires a different part of my brain. If an executive is thinking in that higher part of their brain, they're going to make better decisions. So the key is when they're in the whirlwind, they're typically way down here. They're not on the higher end of their thinking scale because they're trying to process too much. So the technique that I love to do is anything that will get them out of this by taking one step at a time, pulling one piece out, pulling another piece out. Sometimes it's, well, let's write it on the board. Let's just do a brain dump. And you take each one. The magic, though, is just in the fact that we got them to stop. Just sit still. Let's talk. Let's think. Let's work through this. Because we get caught up in, when we're in the whirlwind, it's all about activity. No, I got to be doing this. I got to be doing this. I got to be doing this. No, you got to be doing this. We got to sit back and look and make sure that you're doing the right things, the right way, the right time. And make sure that other people are doing the right things at the right way, the right time.
So am I hearing you say when you're in the whirlwind, you got to slow down?
Yeah.
At least for a few seconds?
You got to slow down to go faster. Tell people that all the time. They just kind of look at me. And I'm like, yeah. And you know, I love the analogy too that, you know, to slow down to go faster. I'm on a bicycle and I'm going 30 miles an hour. Then I realized that I was in such a hurry to get on the road that I didn't put on reflectors, that my chain is loose. I've got all these other things that I didn't do or that I didn't do well. Well, I'm doing 30 miles an hour. It's hard to tighten a chain when you're doing 30 miles an hour. It's hard to take one hand off of the handlebars and put on the lights and do those things. Okay, when I'm doing 30 miles an hour, I can't afford to stop because if I do, I lose all momentum. But I can slow down. If I slow down enough, if I get down 15 miles an hour, I've still got momentum, but it allows me then to put some stability into the bicycle, to tighten up things that need to be tightened up. And yeah, some things I may not be able to fix unless I stop. But, you know, in that case, I can fix it when it stops. But right now, we're just going to make it as strong as we can. So it's the same concept in the whirlwind. Slow it down. Focus on what we need to focus on by identifying what I have control over, eliminating the stuff that I don't have control over, identifying where I can influence some of that. But the stuff that I can't control, all it does is create more whirlwind.
Has it been your experience that the smaller the business, the more susceptible the business owner is to allowing himself to be in the whirlwind?
Yeah, it is. And I think a lot of that is because, again, there's ownership, pride and ownership. They built it. It's their baby. Therefore, they're the ones that are going to fix it. They feel like they have to. Sometimes it's resource constraint. They don't have the people. They don't have the money. Therefore, they have to do it. And they may not be the right people to do it. But they still have to do it because they can't afford to pay anybody to come in and do it. So you got all these pieces to it. But when you see that small business, it's really, I don't want to say it's no different, but it's not as different as people would like to say or believe that it is than a big business, because it's all the same stuff that goes on. It's just the scale of it that's different. But that small business owner can get wrapped up really quick. But I've also seen some Fortune 100 CEOs get wrapped up real quick. And those, you talk about fun to unwind, those are real fun to unwind, because that's where I run into most of the egos, is in the past working with those large companies and those senior executives that, you know, they've climbed the ladder. They have achieved their version of the Holy Grail. And for a coach to come in and try and help them be better, most of the time it's laughable. So you got to figure out different ways to approach it.
You kind of went this direction earlier. Do you think there's obviously humility is an issue, ego is an issue, which is the opposite of humility in most cases. Do you see a lot of leaders find their identity in leadership?
Absolutely.
Is that a problem or is that a good thing?
I think it's a problem. And I'll give you a funny example. Years and years ago, in my last corporate role, we had done some training, and a group of us had gone through this influence skills training and sales training. And part of it, we had done an assessment, a little DISC assessment. I was familiar with it, but the guys that I went through with weren't. And a few days after the training, we're all sitting around one of the offices talking, and it was all of us plus one other person that hadn't gone through the training, who was another executive in the company. And we're making jokes, cutting up, and I made a comment about, oh, that's just your C coming out in you, and other one bounces back and says, oh, it's just your D, and we know what that stands for, something along that line. Well, the one executive that had not gone through the training goes, what are you guys talking about? And I'm like, oh, I didn't even think about it. So we took this assessment. I gave him just a quick 5-minute debrief on what DISC is and what it means. And he stands up, puts his hands on his hips, shoulders back, and says, well, I know what I am. And we're like, oh, what's that? And I'm not going to use his name because if he watches this, he knows I tell the story. But he goes, well, I'm a D. I'm like, and every one of us are like, no, I mean, people are falling off desks laughing. And he's looking around and he goes, what are you laughing at? He goes, I'm a D. I have to be. And I'm like, why do you have to be? He goes, because I'm a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, he still claims he's a D, even though he's taken it multiple times and he's not. Mm. It's a running joke. But in his mind, in his perspective, as far as everything that he had learned, he thought that, number one, that he had to be a certain way to be a leader. But number two, he thought that leadership was something that it wasn't. Mm-hmm. And he's learned since then. He's a phenomenal leader. But it took him a little while to figure it out, that it wasn't about X's and O's. It wasn't about, being a direct, aggressive, assertive type person. Mm-hmm. It wasn't any of that. But his identity was all about leadership, about being a leader. And in his opinion, he had to be a specific way to be that. Mm-hmm. And he wasn't. And that had been part of the reason that he had not progressed up to that point. Mm-hmm. He was great at a number of things. He wasn't great at other things. So when he figured out that he didn't have to be great at everything and that he could succeed at being really good in this space and allowing other people to come in and help him be good in these other spaces, mm-hmm. he started to blossom. Mm. But for him, that meant that he had to lose the fact that it's all about being a leader. It's not. It's about leading. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of my biblical message when I was corporate, was it's not about being a leader. It's about leading. If you lead, you can be a leader. But it's about leading. It's about how do I connect with people and get them to follow me and to do the things that we need to get done so that all of us can be successful.
Mm. And your definition of success?
Again, depends on who you're talking to, but for me, it's defined clearly in the Bible. So everything that I do is all about disciple making. It's about taking the word out. How that shows up is very different on every day. I could be leading a Bible study one day. That's going to show up that way. Mm-hmm. I could be talking to a group of CEOs about how to do marketing. It's going to show up a different way that day. Mm-hmm. Or we could be doing a deep dive with a CEO on their financials. Mm. It's going to show up differently that way. Mm-hmm. But the one thing that's consistent in all of it is how I love them and how they feel loved. Mm. Because to me, that's the one thing that is consistent in all of the New Testament and all the Gospels. It's all about love. It's about Jesus loving. Not Jesus accepting, Jesus loving.
I don't remember the quote, but there's something about when you pass on from this earth, people don't remember what you think, but they do remember how you made them feel.
Yep. 100%. 100%. But I think it goes beyond just how you make people feel, because I can make you feel good and not do good. Mm-hmm. I can make you feel bad by doing good. Mm. It's what I do after you feel bad that matters. Because at the end of the day, I'm not responsible for how you feel. I'm responsible for my actions. You're responsible for owning how you feel as a result of it. And if I offend you in some way, then, I have to take ownership for whatever it is that I did, but I can't own your feeling.
You mentioned the word offense.
That's the word today.
Yeah, I was going to say, it seems like our society is easily offendable. Are you seeing that?
Here's a perfect example, and it drives me crazy. Chick-fil-A recently, within the last year, hired a new executive to their staff. He is the director of equity and inclusion. Well, all of a sudden, everything is blown up now that Chick-fil-A is going woke. And I'm like, wait a minute, that doesn't sound like Chick-fil-A. So I went and researched it. Pull up Google. Dove into Chick-fil-A's website. The DEI that Chick-fil-A is talking about is not the DEI that everybody else at Target and Bud Light and everybody else is talking about. The DEI that Chick-fil-A is talking about is the same thing that Chick-fil-A's been talking about since it started. And it has nothing to do with color, gender, or whatever's out there. But all of a sudden, because people see DEI, they're offended. Now they want to boycott Chick-fil-A. They hadn't bothered to learn. They haven't bothered to ask questions, haven't bothered to seek out information as to what really is going on. And we have the same problem with everything else in society. There are trigger words. Love that, trigger words out there. There are trigger words that trigger anybody and everybody. But when we get triggered, instead of responding, if we just step back and said, wait a minute, is what I'm hearing the truth? Or is what I'm hearing somebody else's version of the truth? Find out for ourselves. We're too lazy. It's just easier to be offended. It's easier to raise Cain about Chick-fil-A and to say, let's boycott them.
What makes us, I want to use the word desire. What makes us desire to be offended?
Oh, we love being victimed.
Okay. Why do you think that is?
That goes back to my circles.
Okay.
That knows the no control zone. If we're living in that, if we're the victim, we don't have to take responsibility. We don't like taking responsibility. As a society, we like it to be everybody else's fault. Because if it
has it been that way more than 5 years?
Oh yeah.
More than 50?
I think we could probably go back and talk to Cain and Abel.
Okay.
Maybe even Adam and Eve. I don't know.
So, what we're seeing, seems like everybody's talking like this is all new. Man, we've never been so divided. Yeah, and that's tempting to think that. But it was, in the 1940s, we're in world wars. The whole world's divided. So I think there's the micro divisions. Maybe technology's made us more aware. I don't know.
I think that, to me, that's what it is. It's more visible to us. The division has always been there. We've always had differences of opinion. But there's two things, actually. I think it is the fact that we can see it. But the other piece to it is that I think, too, that now I lost my train of thought. This is one of those we'll have to edit out. Oh, man. Ask the question again.
Do you think we're more divided than we ever have been? Or do you think division's always been there and something in modern society has made it more visible? Are we less tolerant as a society? What's changed, or has it?
I don't think anything's changed. Human nature is still the same as day one. I think what's changed is the visibility through social media and everything else. I think what's changed is our ability to have a voice or believe that we have a voice in it without a face or name, the anonymity of social media. I think that's had a play in it. But I also think, too, that there's a piece inside of this that goes even deeper. And are you familiar? I know you've seen the movie Jesus Revolution. You think back to that time period, and the hippies were looking for something. Well, they found it in drugs, they found it in sex, they found it in all kinds of things. And eventually, a group of them found it in Jesus. Okay, well, I think we're seeing some of the same thing happen. When you start looking at the trans, the LGBTQ, all of that is identity stuff. People are looking for who they are, and they're trying on things. And I think that's part of it, but I also think too that as a society, the other change that's happened is, all of the information that we get and how we as parents use that information, I think has created some situations where, we're not paying attention the way that we used to. I'll give you a for instance, use myself. With my daughter, my daughter's sweet peaches and cream. At least I thought she was. Junior year in high school, things started going a little awry, but I just thought it was girl drama, because that's what I had always seen was girl drama. After she graduated high school, she became somebody I didn't know. She was running with people I kind of looked at and I'm going, where did this come from? They're almost 180 degrees away from anything that she's ever been around. And what I realized going through that time period is that I quit watching, I quit paying attention. And I think that we've done a lot of that in society as parents with our kids. And because of that, there's some ripple effect. I think we're seeing some of that ripple effect in how kids are gaining their identity. And there's a lot of confusion that's out there. Satan is masterful at creating confusion, especially when we don't have the right identity. And so I think that's what we're seeing is we're seeing a very active Satan at work. I think we're seeing a lot of ripple effects from years that we weren't paying attention to things that we should have been paying attention to. And we're seeing things accelerate in speed like nothing because of technology and because of social media. So we're seeing all of these things come together. I don't think that's much different than it was in the 1940s. It was just, it is different, but
Less present.
Yeah, I think it was all still there. But I also think too that there's probably the one thing that's been challenged that to me is the most prolific difference is the desire to normalize things that are not normal, so that people feel okay. And I don't remember that. And I grew up in the 60s. I don't remember any of that. Grew up in the early 70s. Don't remember any of that. People were people. We didn't look at what was normal or abnormal. People were people. But now all of a sudden, how people are, it's all about how people are and the normalization of that.
Seems like maybe we're a little more judgmental, or at least we're more vocal about being judgmental.
Oh, just a little. Just a little.
Final thoughts. Got to wrap this show up.
Oh man, yeah. There's just so much in that. But for me, if somebody said, "Okay, sum it all up for me," living life as a leader, whether Christian or not, it really is simple. We know the right things to do. At our base, it's all about our values. Our values inform us what's right. Executing them may not always be easy because our values may not be in alignment with what we think we need to do. That's the hard part. So my challenge to people is, which one are you going to trust more? Are you going to stay true to your values, to who you are, to what you say you believe? Or are you going to do what you think society says? Oh, this is the only way to achieve success. And depending upon how you find success, you'll get your answer. So it comes back to that.
Oh, I've enjoyed it.
Oh, absolutely.
I have to have you back for sure, if you'll come back.
Yeah, probably so.
Thanks, brother.
All right, brother. I appreciate it. Thank you.